I'm going to turn it over to Laura Kerr, partner with Stoll Reeves. They're our title sponsor. They get to kick this session off. Laura, this is your second, third, fourth time doing this. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about your work with your firm, and I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. Start off the conference. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Laura Kerr. I'm a partner at Stoll Reeves. I'm really excited to be here. This is my favorite panel every year, even the years when I wasn't moderating it, because I think a goal of this conference, when the planning committee gets together and thinks, what do we want this to be? Why are we here? One of the primary goals is to open up a venue to have conversation between the regulated community and regulators, and to make sure that we create space for that. And what a better way to kick it off than to actually have the regulators up here talking about their priorities, what happened last year, what their priorities are for this year. So really grateful for you all making the time for this panel, and really excited. We will save a bit of time at the end for questions, hopefully, unless it gets really heated up here. So do think, if anything comes up, feel free to think through that and raise your hand and ask questions. So with that, I'm going to introduce the panel. That said, no one wants to hear me read everyone's bio, so we're going to do this in a dynamic way, where I'm going to introduce every panelist by allowing them to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with Dan McCracken, who's a regional administrator at the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. Dan, can you tell us a little bit about your responsibilities as a regional administrator?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I'm Dan McCracken. I'm the regional administrator for the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. So I oversee all of our environmental programs in the 5 northern counties of Idaho. DEQ in Idaho is set up, divided among 6 regions. So we have our headquarters in Boise, and then 6 regional offices scattered throughout the state. So I oversee all of our programs in the 5 northern counties, including clean water, clean air, waste and remediation, all of our engineering approvals of drinking water and wastewater systems.
Great. Can you tell us, since a lot of professionals that come to this conference are new in their field or just getting a start, I like to ask our panelists who are in jobs where they've really kind of rose through the ranks, what was kind of the formative experience for you that led you into an environmental career, and how did you start?
Yeah, so for me it was, I think I was in high school, maybe junior or senior high school. I was starting to realize I probably wasn't going to be drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. And
I'm so sorry. That was probably a disappointing moment.
It started with a little bit of a disappointment. And we had one of my high school math classes. We had an environmental engineer came in and was talking about his career, and it was really exciting. The thing that stood out to me the most was he had all these pictures of people in waders walking in streams, and I'm like, man, that's what I like to do for fun all the time. It looked, they weren't fishing; they were holding a different kind of rod, but it still looked like a lot of fun. And so that was really what got me interested in doing environmental work. Is just the idea of being able to work outside and protect the areas that I grew up in the Northwest, playing in rivers and streams and lakes, and having that be the purpose of my work to protect those areas.
Great, thanks, Dan. Matt, let's move to you. So Matt Davis is the Policy and External Affairs Manager at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. It's a long title. Matt, tell us about your job.
Yeah, well, thanks, and good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here and appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, in my role at DEQ, I oversee kind of a handful of teams in our headquarters office. First is our government relations group, so they're responsible for representing the department in the Oregon legislature with the federal government, tribal nations, kind of very traditional government relations work. I also oversee a team of budget analysts that are really kind of forward focused. They support the decision making around our budget planning and execution at the department. I also have communications. And then finally, the group of folks who manage the process of rulemaking and engagement with our Environmental Quality Commission. In Oregon, we have an independent rulemaking body that adopts, repeals, amends our rules. So a lot of planning goes into engaging that group of folks.
And Matt, what was your first position at DEQ?
My first position at DEQ was on the government relations team as the air quality legislative analyst. I didn't grow up in the environmental field. I was working in public health, and kind of landed at DEQ in a way that career paths meander.
The best ones. Great. And Heather Davis, last but certainly not least, Heather Bartlett, last but certainly not least, is the Deputy Director of the Washington Department of Ecology. Heather, tell us a bit about your day-to-day and what the Deputy Director job is about.
Yeah. Well, good morning. It's good to be here. I think this is the fourth time I've been part of your the Regulators panel. So at Ecology, we have our director, of course, who is cabinet to our governor, and then my position, and then all of the environmental programs, there's 12 of them, report to me, along with our Office of Equity and Environmental Justice. So really, when we think about how we approach our work, the environment knows no boundaries. We organize ourselves in order based upon our federally delegated authority, our state authority, our fund sources, and in a way to get the work done. But at the end of the day, we do our best work when we can think across the environmental boundaries. And so I think a lot of my job in working with the environmental program managers is to think about things that way. And then also, because I have a lot of my work internally focused, right? Operations, administration, budget, rules. So that is another key part of my job, is just ensuring that the system of the agency is functioning well.
And tell us, for you, what was a formative experience in your career path that led you to where you are today?
Well, I would say, I grew up in Washington, and my family were avid outdoor people, right? We hunted, we fished, we camped. I never thought about doing it for a career, but when I graduated from college, my first job was as a fisheries biologist. And so I spent my day out in waders or on rafts or in boats or in a helicopter doing spawning ground surveys. And I thought, wow, this is a cool job. So that's really how I ended up getting in that. And then eventually, all my work was associated with water quality. So I decided to take the job leading the water quality program at the state of Washington in ecology. And then I moved into this position.
So I think the lesson learned is if we want to recruit more people to the environmental sector, we should show them pictures of people in waders or get them outside.
Get them outside. Get them outside.
Great. Well, I think to start off, we'd like to hear from each of you, do kind of a year in review. We'd like to hear from each of you, what was your agency up to this year? What were some of the primary challenges you faced? What were the high moments and the wins that you really want to make sure that this group knows about? Matt, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, great. Well, it was a big one. So I'm going to go through kind of a number of maybe higher profile activities that DEQ was engaged in, and then some of what we're dealing with. I think notably on the regulatory side, just 2 weeks ago, our commission readopted the Climate Protection Program, which is Oregon's regulatory system for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel use. Those rules were adopted several years ago and invalidated last year at the Court of Appeals because of a notice technicality. So this was not a copy-paste rulemaking. It was a really intentional and deliberative process to make the program better. And you're going to hear more about it at another session today or tomorrow, so I won't steal any of their thunder. The Commission also adopted rules to implement the state's Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act. And this is an overhaul of the state's materials management system that really bring producers of certain materials kind of into the fold and responsible for the life cycle impacts of those materials. Operationally, we've continued to migrate many of the programs you all work on and with to our Your DEQ Online system. This is the comprehensive environmental data management system, kind of bringing DEQ into the 21st century. It's been a years-long process, and we are about complete with the full migration of permit complaints and other programs. And I also want to thank many of you for your patience in navigating that transition and giving us feedback and maybe serving on focus groups and things like that. That's a major accomplishment for DEQ, and I think we're already seeing the benefits of a more modern system. Related to that, we survey our permit holders every other year on how it's going, their satisfaction with the agency on a number of measures, and really proud to report that the survey conducted this fall found that our agency improved on every single measure of customer service. So timeliness, accuracy, ability to get a DEQ staff person on the phone when you needed it. Really proud of that, and significant increases, 10 percentage point increases on many measures. So that's a place where we want to keep that good momentum going. And then, in terms of challenges, or I think change is just a persistent one. We have had significant turnover in our policymaking body. We have a new chair, three of 5 new members in the last year, and the most senior member just only having 3 years of experience. So that's a lot of work. Any of you who manage a board or who've welcomed a new manager kind of know what that process looks like. And I wouldn't call it a challenge, because I think the fresh perspective is important, but it's a lot of work bringing people up to speed, particularly in our line of work, which is really technical. And then finally, on the staff side, half of DEQ has less than 5 years of experience at our agency. That is a major transition in the workforce. It's not to say that many of those people don't have experience in other agencies or other realms, but I think, as many of you know, it can take years to come up to speed in any particular environmental regulatory program. And when we're having that kind of magnitude of a shift in the workforce, that has impacts just in our ability to do our business, and on the regulated community as well, in terms of kind of folks in the agency that have familiarity with your operations and your challenges. So that's something we'll continue to deal with, and it's, again, fresh perspective and new folks in the workforce is a good thing, but it's also it's going to require attention.
Heather, same question for you. At Ecology, what do you consider your greatest successes in the past year? And we also want to hear about challenges that the agency is facing.
First one, which isn't exactly our success, but we're certainly celebrating it, is the Washington voters resoundingly did not pass the citizen-based initiative that would have repealed our Climate Commitment Act, our huge landmark piece of legislation that puts a price on carbon and helps us hit our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that are set in a completely different statute by the legislature. So that was really, really probably a big success, and that just happened. Another success this past year has been the amount of federal funding that we are receiving for the Hanford cleanup. First time ever that it's hit over $3 billion. Believe it or not, is not enough, but that was a significant boost in federal funding to meet the cleanup targets that we have. And a lot of gratitude to our congressional team that I think has been continuing to push. Another part of a success was at Hanford was our holistic negotiations, which really sets the schedule for the tank cleanup. It's an agreement with Department of Energy, EPA, and Ecology, and has really been a cornerstone for ensuring progress for cleanup at Hanford. So the funding and then the completion of the holistic negotiations, big success. In the water area, we updated our aquatic life for toxics criteria. That had not been updated since the 90s. It's a key piece of information that covers a lot of contaminants or pollutants, and from some of the obvious ones that we think about, like arsenic or lead or copper. But this time we also added 6-PPDQ and PFAS. So those were 2 additions. I know we added some more, but those are 2 that stick out in my head. Another accomplishment this year was reissuance of the industrial stormwater general permit. That's a big permit. It's got like 1,200 permittees. And you think about industry and the breadth and type of permittees that are covered under that general permit. So that's a significant progress for protection of the environment, and we issue that permit every 5 years, but we get 1 year, and year 2 we're starting to work on reissuance, the process of reissuance, and working with those that are covered. And then I'm going to say the last, we probably have some other really good accomplishments too that I'm going to think about. One is toxics in cosmetics. Our Toxics-Free Cosmetics Act was passed, and we've started work in a consumer protection area, and the toxics-free cosmetic is really, and I think it just goes along that line of rather than cleaning up pollution, let's prevent it from entering commerce in the first place. And so we've started on the toxics-free cosmetics work. And then the last one, the work that we do in environmental protection or even natural resource management can take years to see success. You start a process. And so copper out of brake pads, we knew in the 90s that copper was a problem for salmon. And it wasn't until 2010 that we'd work, but that was time that we worked with manufacturers in order to come up with a plan to remove copper out of brake pads. Well, 2025 is when we should have no more copper in brake pads in Washington. So I just want to celebrate and acknowledge that success, because that just shows the time that it can take when you realize there's an issue. You have to work with those that are going to be regulated or the manufacturers to come up with a solution that will work to make it eventually happen.
I won't let you off the hook without telling us about some of your challenges.
Oh yeah, that's right, the challenges. The obvious challenge that we're facing right now is a huge financial crisis in the state of Washington. We just had a freeze initiated, a freeze on travel, a freeze on hiring, a freeze on service contracts, a freeze on goods and services that started December 2nd. Forecasts have us at a $10 to $12 billion hole over the next 4 years. So that's significant. And we're still, implementing what that means. And so that would be a significant challenge. I'm going to be honest, another challenge that we worked through, even though I identified it as a success, was that citizen-based initiative to repeal the Climate Commitment Act. We knew that in March that was going to be on the ballot, and it was just a huge shadow over the agency, over staff, and frankly, it had ripple effects across our state government, because the revenue that is generated from those auctions actually some funding goes to 37 different agencies. So that was, a real challenge to work through. And I'm just, thankful that, particularly given the general fund state of that we're in, I'm really thankful about that. I'm trying to think of some other challenges. Some other challenges is change in our workforce. Like Matt referenced, we have 40% of our workforce has been at the agency less than 5 years. And so many of them have come, in the COVID world. And so the things that not only is our workforce new or newer, but we don't have a building space that, and when we worked in the buildings a lot, you used to be able to get information really quickly. You could ask somebody sitting at the desk next to you, from simple things like, can I get a travel advance, to, bigger things like, hey, is it important that I, get this, or what do you think? And they would have a thought partner to work through. We just don't have that anymore, and I think the only ways that people communicate, or the predominant ways people communicate, tend to be, through passive means of like emails or maybe a Teams message. And I think that takes an extraordinary amount of time and energy from people. So people feel overwhelmed. Because I just think about when I'm in the office, how quickly I can get things. So I think a challenge is our workload. And I think some of it is driven by the style in which we're working. We haven't yet adjusted our cadence and approach to this new style of working to help us optimize and be efficient and effective.
Interesting. Dan, tell us about IDEQ's successes this year.
Yeah, I will highlight one thing that I'm most proud of with our work at DEQ. And there's a little bit of history that wasn't just this last year. But coming out of the pandemic, we were in the fortunate position of actually having a state surplus. And the governor had approached us and was coming up with what things could the state do to take advantage of some of the surplus funding, and said, could you guys spend a few $1 million on maybe some water quality projects or drinking water, wastewater infrastructure? And for context, prior to the pandemic, our typical annual budget's right around $70 million as a state, so we're quite a bit smaller than our neighbors. So an extra $10 million here or there is a pretty significant increase to our overall workload. But we recognize the opportunity. Let's go ahead and get some good work on the ground. So we started with a series of projects in the Coeur d'Alene Basin specifically targeting improving water quality in Coeur d'Alene Lake and reducing phosphorus loading. All of those projects that were identified coming out of the pandemic were finished this year. So that was kind of the first milestone. On the tail end of getting those projects on the ground was when some of the American Rescue Plan Act funding started becoming available. And it was kind of a sense of, gosh, you guys did such a good job getting that other money spent. Do you guys think you could spend some more of this money? So over the last 3 years, we have over $740 million in targeted water quality projects. So these are things like stormwater improvements, and drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, cleaning up old contaminated sites that have been, that have no responsible party, and we had the deadline of December of 2024 to get all those funds allocated, and here we are, December of 2024, and all those funds have been allocated. We have all that work under contract, and it's going to be a big push between now and December 2026 to get all those projects finished on the ground. But we've really, with going from $70 million a year to $740 million, more pass-through money and grants issued with. We did get a few extra positions, but largely those have sat vacant. And so that kind of gets to really our challenge is we've seen similar struggles in workforce turnover. Our metric is 60% of our workforce is 3 years or less in their position. And we have lots of positions that have simply just sat vacant, and at the same time we're seeing just tremendous growth. Depending on which list you look at, if you look over the last 4 or 5 years, Idaho is usually the fastest growing state, or somewhere in the top 5, kind of depending on which time period you look at, in terms of percentage increase. So a huge influx of new residents, and that in turn puts a lot of stress on drinking water systems, wastewater systems, to ensure they have adequate capacity. Builders are wanting to add, new subdivision after new subdivision. Similar to what, I think Oregon and Washington have seen a lot of that in recent years, but it's really hitting us hard right now at a time where we're pretty strapped to have staff to help, support those projects. So that's kind of an ongoing challenge for us.
Great, thank you. Now that we've looked at the past, I want to look to the future for a minute. If each of you, and we'll do kind of a quick down the line, if each of you could highlight 2 of the agency's priorities for the year to come, we'd like to hear what you're thinking about what's coming. Heather, I'll start with you.
I would say my first priority is onboarding our new director, Casey Sixkiller, who starts January 15th, and also saying goodbye to our director, Laura Watson, whom I've been a partner with now for 5 years, right? We've been through a lot. She's going to move over and be the deputy chief to our new Attorney General, Nick Brown. So excited for her in a new role. But bringing Casey in, and he's going to start right with legislative session will have started, so it'll be fast and furious. I would say the other things that we'll be looking for as our legislative priorities is helping to bring 20% of our legislators are going to be new to government. We have a new governor, so it's going to be introducing our portfolio and bringing them up to speed. Probably PFAS funding strategy is going to be one of our biggest priorities.
Great, thank you. Matt?
Yeah, I think in the upcoming year, our my number one priority is getting the agency an adequate budget out of the legislative process. Our legislature convenes mid-January with a mandate to finish their work by late June. We're not facing the degree of budget crisis as our neighbors to the north, but it is a more constrained environment than we've seen in the last really 10 years. And for DEQ, 90% of our agency is funded by fees, permit fees, and licensing, et cetera. And so a lot of that work is working with fee payers to negotiate what a reasonable increase can look like relative to the services they're receiving. And we're going to be having conversations about fees in a handful of our programs. So that'll be a huge body of work over the next 5 months. And, relatedly, in terms of how we're talking to the legislature and what we're spending our time in as an agency, we're really asking for some time to just catch our breath. We've been given a ton of new programs and responsibilities over the last 3 to 4 legislative sessions. And all new and exciting work, but we need the space and time to deliver on that work and to do it well. And that'll really be our message to the legislature around our budget and also their policy ambitions is let's focus on all the things we have going right now and really make sure we're doing our work well. So,
Dan.
We have one priority this year, and just as an emphasis of how important it is, we decided if we only ask for one thing, maybe we'll get it. And that is a package for our legislature to increase our budget to be able to hire and retain staff. So going back to the challenges that we have been seeing in retaining our workforce, we've been working really hard on tying our request to how it affects industry. One example we have is an air quality permit to construct 5 years ago. Our average was about 90 days to get those issued. We're at about 170 days currently in 2024 for that. So we're really highlighting how our inability to retain a workforce, affects citizens in Idaho and businesses. And are focusing on we have one request to the legislature. It's tied to our budget request. It's specifically targeting specific positions that are most kind of frontline working with industry and cranking out permits and getting plans and specifications reviewed for projects. So that is item number one, and it's the only item is increasing pay for our staff so that we can keep them.
Can you elaborate a bit on the staffing challenge? What is the challenge retaining staff?
So we've done I think similar to other things we see across the agency. A lot of folks have retired out of the environmental industry, and there simply aren't staff available to backfill those in many cases. But we've seen with the rapid growth, there's a lot of opportunity out there for other people. And 94% of our exit interviews have said people are leaving because there's higher salary wherever they're going. So not folks that are just retiring, but folks that got offered more money somewhere else. We don't necessarily expect to be completely competitive, with the private sector, or even we have staff in Coeur d'Alene that will leave and take a job with Ecology in Spokane. We've always been a little bit less, but when it becomes a 30 to 35% pay difference from one place to another, it becomes where folks can't afford to stay. So we're trying to just get up, not necessarily that we're going to be the highest paid place to work, but if we can at least get where some of our other quality of life and those kinds of things balance out, and it's worth taking a little bit less, but not like a whole different economy less.
Understood. Thank you. So let's dive into some of the more topical issues that you all are facing that you touched on in your year in review. I'd like to start with, and I think this will be a theme of the conference, the new federal administration. Obviously, on November 5th, Donald Trump was elected president-elect for the second time, and we anticipate, based on his first term, as well as what he said on the campaign trail, that there are going to be significant, I think it's probably an understatement, but significant shifts in environmental policy and natural resource policy at the federal level. I want to hear what type of changes does your agency anticipate making as a result of the upcoming change in the federal administration? Dan, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, start with Idaho. Maybe we have something positive to say. I don't know. This is a tough one. So I think looking with what we have been doing over the last 4 years, where we're seeing a major increase in the amount of federal funds that are available for us to pass through to communities, we're expecting that to stop. We're not expecting to see a lot of federal funds. Most of the programs will revert back to kind of a core level, and in a lot of cases, I think what we experienced the previous go around was they reverted to even a smaller base level than they were before. So that will be tough. We have a lot of our communities don't have a real big tax base, and so being able to tap into the federal funding stream is an important way for them, just to meet kind of the basic kind of compliance levels in the Safe Drinking Water Act. So that'll be a challenge. I will say, I guess one thing that we don't expect is that we don't expect every single environmental regulation to get rolled back and we're all going to be out of work. More likely what will happen on the regulatory side is as things get rolled back and new policies get rolled out, it actually will create more work for us just to understand, okay, how does this new policy apply? What do we do? So on the regulatory side, I expect to be very busy. I expect folks in the legal world will be very busy as new policies come out and there are challenges for those. So there's certainly still a lot of work in the environmental industry for folks to do. And I think the other I lost my last thought on that. So I think that I'll leave it at that.
We'll let you interrupt if it comes back. Matt, what's your reaction? How is Oregon DEQ planning for the next 4 years?
Yeah, well, kind of building off of Dan's last point, in Oregon during the first Trump administration, our legislature adopted what they called the Oregon Environmental Protection Act. It's basically a system to evaluate changes at the federal level and to kind of create backstops to prevent rollback in environmental regulation. And that takes a tremendous amount of work on our part, given the volume of change we experienced in the first administration, and I think we could expect in the second administration. So that's the agency team reviewing the Federal Register routinely, evaluating what the changes would mean on the ground, and then the law requires that we come to our commission with strategies to maintain kind of a baseline level of protection in the state of Oregon. So that work has largely gone dormant over the last 4 years because we have not typically seen kind of loosening of restrictions. So we're talking now about how we kind of spin back up that process. It's a process that the environmental community and the regulated community got really used to, those reports to our commission, and will be a significant body of work. I also think we're going to be monitoring the congressional budgeting process really closely, both for the federal funds that we get as an agency that has delegated authority to implement federal programs, but also Oregon has been the beneficiary of really once-in-a-generation funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'll just say it feels very uncertain kind of exactly what might happen, both on the congressional front, but also how in the executive side they may implement some of the awards that we've been granted but have not yet been in receipt of those funds. So that'll just be an area of particular attention for DEQ over the next year.
I think to step back, to stay on this topic, but to step back, I think what I'd like to hear about is we're obviously seeing significant pendulum shifts with every recent presidential election. And I'd like to hear more kind of holistically from your agencies. How does that impact your operations when we go from one side to the other and back every 4 years? What does that change in the way you work day to day and how your agency operates? Heather?
I would say, when the pendulum swings either way, it can be disruptive, certainly to the state. Right now, we're preparing to have the pendulum swing away from our state laws and leave a gap, and it places increased responsibility on the state to either have to stand up, fund, cover, litigate in order to maintain the protections that, like Washington, has prioritized and valued. Then again, if it swings back, right, then we could be over-regulating, and it's unnecessary if a federal government has come closer or aligned with the current state laws. So I would say it puts these states in this, should I stay, should I go? Should I stay, should I go? And that can be just disruptive as you're trying to implement programs over the long haul.
Yeah, it makes sense. Dan, do you want to react to that?
Yeah. So in Idaho in particular, we have part of our state law, particularly on water quality, is that we are not allowed to have water quality criteria that are any more stringent than the federal requirements. So really our criteria are very, very tied to what is regulated by federal law. As a recent example with the WOTUS interpretation changing on which bodies qualified as WOTUS, a wetland in Idaho would have previously been considered a WOTUS. All of our water quality criteria would have applied to that because it's required under the Clean Water Act. If that's not required under the Clean Water Act, under the new interpretation, then that body of water now has no protection because we don't have a comparable state requirement that imposes any additional regulation. So if it's not regulated by the feds, it's not protected at all. So we have real on-the-ground things where, one day these rules are in place and then the next it's completely gone.
And I assume that can go back and forth as we're seeing these pendulums.
Yes, which makes it very difficult. One of the things we do on a regular basis in the regional offices, working with like local city and county planning and zoning departments on, someone has proposed a marina on this kind of adjacent area, and they're going to build all these homes and condominiums and put in a marina and all of these things, and to one day say, okay, here's all the things you need to do, and then the next is like, well, never mind, none of those things apply. And oh wait, now they apply again. It is pretty difficult.
Yeah, and impossible to plan for. You hear a regulated community that wants certainty, and it kind of is the exact opposite. So we heard from both Oregon and Washington that your climate protection programs, whether they escaped a overhaul or were implemented, were a real focus of your agencies. Can you tell us, the Trump administration has been very clear in its intention to scale back climate protection programs at the federal level. I think the president-elect has said that that's one of his top priorities from an environmental perspective. How do you expect that your state program will operate given that federal mandate, and will your state step in, and how will these programs that you've just implemented fill that gap to the extent they will? Matt, why don't you start?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think kind of the top line message is that you should expect to see Oregon remain a climate leader. We have long been a party of the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is a coalition of states that kind of reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris Agreement when, at the time, President Trump withdrew the country from those agreements. And we take that commitment to kind of doing our part to reducing emissions really seriously. Most of Oregon's kind of preeminent climate programs do not rely on federal authorities or the federal government. They're grounded in authorities that our state legislature has given the department and the commission. That's true of the Clean Fuels Program, which has been operating now for almost a decade, and the Climate Protection Program, which will restart here on January 1st. That said, I think part of our overall strategy does rely on the federal government, though. We to kickstart the clean energy transition in Oregon, we're really relying on our $200 million climate pollution reduction grant that the EPA awarded us this year. We need those funds to incentivize the transition to cleaner vehicles and to heat pumps to mitigate methane emissions at landfills, et cetera. So, part of our overall framework was designed with this infusion of funds in mind while these state programs really kick off in earnest. I think the other thing to watch is transportation has been the largest source of emissions in Oregon for a while now. And part of that work in Oregon, we rely on adopting cleaner vehicle emission standards that are promulgated by California. And it's kind of no mystery that California's ability to do that work is under threat by the incoming administration and potentially the court system. So that could, depending on the outcome, will have implications on the state's ability to achieve our transportation-related goals.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just echo what Matt says. So we have really robust state laws. Our legislature has a large appetite for supporting climate pollution reduction programs, right? So the cap and invest is one portion of it, but there's several parts to what is going to help our state hit our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, from hydrofluorocarbon work to cleaner fuels, zero emission vehicles, targets that are all complementary to work together. But I would also say, in this transition, clean energy and clean energy siting. I didn't get to talk about that as one of our challenges, but when I think out clean energy and clean energy siting in particular is really necessary in order for us to be successful. And that has been an important partnership that we've had with the federal government for either the funding. I would say with the states, in the West Coast states' work relative to like a cap and invest program or a price on carbon. There are other states in the nation that were watching what happened with Washington's citizen-based initiative, because California is so large, its market is so large, it's like the 10th largest economy in the world. So most states don't consider California another state to try to mirror. But when Washington was able to establish our program and it sustained itself, now they're starting to look, the East Coast from New York, Massachusetts, I think Pennsylvania, they're all looking at similar programs. So I do actually am confident that even as there may be some interest in rolling, back, I think that states will have some autonomy to move it forward. The other piece I want to get to is innovation, right? I mean, we have the ability to be really innovative as we move forward, and I think that is a good thing for the nation.
States as the laboratories. It's the whole fundamental premise of environmental law. So transitioning, given this is the Business and Environment Conference, I'd be remiss not to ask the agencies about kind of your interactions with the regulated community. How are you supporting the regulated community? And let's get into brass tacks. Let's talk about some examples that you can provide of ways that you've collaborated with regulated businesses in your state to create a more successful environmental protection program. Matt, you want to start?
Sure. Two things come to mind that feel proud about this year. One is how we're going to treat really important manufacturing in our climate protection program. And again, I think you'll hear more about that later in the conference, but there was really a recognition in the redesign of the program that that programs like the climate protection program can lead to leakage of the economic benefits that key sectors bring to the state, and also leakage of their emissions to a less regulated environment. And so our final rules kind of, unlike the first set, really recognize that class of industry. It exempts them for the next 3 years while we work together to design an approach similar to what's in Washington, where we're regulating, not a hard cap on their operations, but the carbon intensity of their products. And that's really important in terms of allowing for growth and continued investment. Second is our work with the seafood processing industry. Really important part of Oregon's economy, almost $1 billion in direct and indirect impacts. This is a kind of a long history here of DEQ's water quality permit backlog leading to a general permit for seafood processors that was many years in the making. And then the industry at a facility level had a choice to make to seek coverage under the general permit or to seek out individual NPDES permits. We, in the course of issuing that first individual permit last year, the concern really intensified on the part of the industry. They were seeing that first individual permit, had questions and concerns about what precedent it was setting for future facilities, and really was the state of dialogue was unproductive. So we really had a hard reset this year, and I want to recognize the DEQ staff and folks in the industry that came together and really had an intensive series of meetings throughout the year, kind of digging into the issues on both sides. And the result is a very government accomplishment series of technical papers, but they are meaningful in that they represent kind of common understanding on the key issues. These are reports and letters that are co-signed by the industry leading association and the department, and it kind of lays out how we're going to engage on these issues moving forward. And I jotted down, there's a kind of a cover letter that both parties were signatory to. Give me just a second here. The final sentence is, we are confident that the collaboration reflected in these reports will lead to much better working relationships between the industry and DEQ moving forward. This in and of itself is a win for both parties. And that's not meant to be cheeky. I think in our work in this really complicated environment, the ability to talk to each other and really work through issues clearly is critical. And just feeling really good about the progress made on a really thorny issue. Our seafood processors face unique challenges in Oregon. Unlike in Washington, there's not community treatment infrastructure that they're feeding into. They are kind of many times isolated in smaller communities, and that it's a different system here. And I think feeling optimistic about kind of the path forward there. So.
It's a great example. And again, I think just underscores the importance of having these conversations that can start at this conference. Do you have any reaction to that, Dan?
I'll give maybe a couple Idaho examples of working with industry, and I'm not going to take a specific permit or facility. I think we've always prided ourselves in Idaho have been pretty business friendly. So lots of examples of working with individual facilities on, rulemaking and those kinds of things. But I'll highlight a couple things that kind of tie back to some of our accomplishments this year. And that's our use of advisory committees to help us prioritize the funding that we have been spending over the last few years. So the first one I'll give is the Coeur d'Alene Lake Advisory Committee. Included members, the intent was to kind of get good representation of different stakeholder groups in the watershed. So we had industry groups who had in the past been pretty reluctant to deal with metals contamination in the watershed. So the recreation and tourism folks were concerned about drawing attention to that and have that negatively impact business. So we had a representative from one of the biggest recreation companies on Coeur d'Alene Lake. We had an agricultural company representative, and have them sit down side by side with local governments, state government. We had a Coeur d'Alene tribe representative. We had the local environmental advocacy group, each with a seat at the table to help prioritize projects on how the funding was going to be spent. And that really was a productive process. We had a series of public meetings where we had other interest groups, if they didn't have necessarily a seat at the table, but could provide comment on the application process and prioritizing each of the projects. And really was productive, I think, to have, in particular, kind of the environmental groups and businesses really sitting side by side and kind of debating, hey, which projects do you think are going to be the best value to the community, and having them on really the same side of the table of, hey, what do you think we should do? So that was really productive, and at the end of the day, had consensus on which projects were to support, and so that was a great example. Another one, similarly, an advisory group on developing TMDLs on the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River. We have again representatives from local recreation. We have fishing outfitters, and representative from each of the mines. We have three active mines in that watershed, and representatives from Idaho Conservation League. So again, trying to get stakeholders from all sides, and our staff present kind of the technical basis, but then we're really working together to kind of get all the perspectives and have folks understand all the different perspectives in the watershed and how to best work together on a path forward.
Great. While you are government agencies, I imagine that customer service is a real important kind of goal of the agency. Can you, Heather, talk a bit about how your agency thinks about customer service and how you're trying to improve your customer service to the regulated community?
Yeah. Well, I would say we regard permittees really as our customers, right? If we take off our regulator hat, we're a service provider, and we would assume that all permittees want to be compliant. And so if we're experiencing, and I say we, the big we, both the regulated community, our customers, and ecology as a regulator and service provider, why? Why is that happening, right? Is it funding? Is it technical assistance? Is something not clear or understood? Can we be doing a better job communicating, and how can we be doing that? So we actually do a regulated customer survey. We used to do it every 2 years. Now it's actually every 6 months, and it's not always the same group that is surveyed in the 6-month time frame. But we use that information. We literally break it down by surveyee on who provided information and understand. So one thing that we're finding is that it can seemingly take a long time. We'll go do an inspection, and it might take a long time to get the report back to the permittee or the customer. That's terrible. We should improve that. We have technology that allows us to be able to do things more in real time. So that is one thing that we've started to change, is to incorporate the use of technology in compliance and inspections so that we can get information out more quickly. Another is certainly as we update our permits, we do that in a pretty collaborative way. It's still regulations at the end of the day, but like the industrial stormwater general permit, 6 ppdq, we don't even have a lot of labs yet that are accredited for that. So it's written into the permit, but we delayed implementation for a few years to allow all of us to make sure that there was sufficiency of labs to be able to actually do the monitoring.
Great. Yeah. Well, we are out of time, and I don't want to make anyone late for their first session. So I want to give this panel a warm round of applause for such thoughtful answers and for showing up so early this morning.